Hi, and welcome to this video tutorial on the pre-negotiation plan or negotiation plan template that you'll be using for all of your negotiation plan assignments. My name is Velin, and today we're going to focus on formatting and structure. There is an important video to watch on the negotiation plan guide, which details the content of each of the sections in the negotiation plan. So I'm not going to go into detail about the actual content. That's in the separate video tutorial, so please make sure you watch that. This video focuses on walking you through how to complete a plan in a way that is both effective for you in the negotiation and helps to get you a great mark for the assignment. We're going to do this by also including an example from a previous student's work who completed the effort on an A level. The first thing to note here is that the template has a specific font, Calibri 11 point, that's used to provide you with specific space over the 3-page maximum to create a plan that's going to be effective. It also aids in clarity of reading, and so please make sure you use the font and not make it bigger or smaller. So let's dive into the template and see what's what. Going to the top, as you can see, obviously we have a space for your first name, last name, student ID. The negotiation role is one that's going to be provided to you from the case, so that's going to be very straightforward. You'll know whether you're a buyer or seller, company representative, and so on. Then you put in the section number of the course you're in. This section here where you put in your opponent name, this will not necessarily be known to you before you actually negotiate. So if you're not told who it is in advance, you just leave it blank. Then of course we put in the date, and the date we're looking for here is the date you actually submit your assignment, either through Brightspace or whatever means we're using at the time. So going a little further down, we start to get into the actual formatting of the document. We're going to zoom in here a little closer to have a look at what is expected. You'll notice that right after the line issues and interest, there's a small line space. If you look at the paragraph formatting, you'll see there's a small space in between. And this is to aid in reading, especially online. So please make sure you maintain that. The next part we'll take a look at is a sample paragraph. This is something that you're just going to delete when you actually do your plan. But the X's are just a model showing you the formatting as you continue through your plan. So you see there's a space in between the issues and interest header and then this paragraph where you start. We know from the video tutorial on the negotiation plan guide, you do not put in what you want out of the negotiation. That goes in a different section later. We just want to identify the issues that are actually going to be negotiated. So you see here that we leave a space and we put in our first issue subcategory and start with our first bullet point, which is our first issue. Let's say it's price, and we explain it. Then our second issue, if there is one, it might be delivery or something, we explain it. And then our third one, and so on. Once we've completed noting our issues, this becomes its own subsection on its own. Then after that, we're going to leave one line space and start to get into our interests. In the same way that we did our issues, we're going to do our interests. So we can start with one bullet point. We state the interest clearly and explain it over a couple of lines. Shouldn't need more than that. And then we go on to the next one, just like we did with the issues, and create a new subsection of interests. Let's take a look now at an example from a plan created by a previous student who got an A for her assignment. In this case, the student was a seller for a company producing pistons that they sold to an engine manufacturer. We left out the date here because it wasn't relevant to the tutorial. And so let's take a look at the issues and how she articulated them. The first is the contract price, and this specific language was taken right from the case, so no other explanation was needed. And this is because she detailed the rest of the issues really clearly, and this is something that you need to do. Then we move to the second issue, which is the free advertising, that in the case had to do with something the seller wanted, using a couple of lines to explain what she meant by the free advertising. Then we see the same treatment of the rush fee, another element of the case, a couple of lines to explain it. Then we get to the last element of that particular case, which was a 10% quality insurance fee. We can see how this student was really clear about each of the issues noted in this section and had good line spacing between that and the primary underlying interest, so everything was really clear and easy to read. Let's now look more closely at what the student put down as the main underlying interests. The first one she has is minimizing the loss of the Swiss contract. Now, this is important in the case, but it's perspective that it is her interest in the outcome. So minimizing the loss of the Swiss contract will have some effect on the target and other information later. The next one we look at is the government to be aware that Knight's engines were equipped with Excalibur's high-quality pistons and so on. This is something she has an interest in, and as it relates to the case, there will be likely other things that show up later in the plan that reflect this. Overcoming the shareholders' concerns about the company's revenues. As an employee of the company, that the owners of the company, the shareholders, may have some concerns, but that it's not the concern that is the interest, it is the overcoming. That is the underlying interest. So we can't just state that shareholders have concerns. We have to state our interest in those concerns. Very important for this section. And lastly, reducing the company's inventory by selling at least 8,000 and so on. This is essentially one of the interests of her job. Again, the reducing the company's inventory is an interest that she has, and it will show up later in the content of her plan. Looking back on these two sections, we see she did a great job. Issues were clear, underlying interests were clear. This is what we're looking for. Let's go back to the guide now and have a look at the next section. In this section, we're looking at the key opening data, and this includes your target point, resistance point, opening offer, and your BATNA. This is the section in the plan where we're actually putting forth now what we want out of the deal, what our options are, what our resistance point is. Let's go back to the plan template, and we can see that it's the same formatting, same idea. You leave a line space before your first paragraph or your first bullet point where you're starting with your opening data, and you make sure you follow the formatting all the way through. You remember to delete these little X's. This just shows you the starting point before you start putting in your opening data. You start with your target point. That's your first heading. You identify what it is. If you only have price, then you put in the dollar amount for that. And so you put in your amount and a brief explanation that follows that explains how you chose that amount. Only needs to be a couple of lines, just being clear so that you know why you're choosing that target, and that'll help you later on in the negotiation. You move to the next one, which is your resistance point. Again, you leave a little line space in between. We're going to show you that later. You put in the dollar amount if it's a price issue, and you put in your explanation after that. Then what follows is your opening offer. Put in your price and an explanation, and then your BATNA. And your BATNA, of course, is given to you in the case, so you just need to identify it and make sure that it's clearly explained. And of course, you can expand these sections, no problem, to take up as much space as you need to cover all of your key opening data. You must include for your target, resistance point, and opening offer every element of that target, resistance, and opening offer. So you need to make sure that your target point, if it's more than price, they have price and the other elements. Same thing with your resistance point and your opening offer. Let's move over to our example now from a previous student and see how she handled this section well. You can see that it's really clear. She identified each element very clearly with some space between it, so it's very easy to read. First is her target point. And in this case, for this case, she identifies a price for the piston and explains why she chose that price. Then we have the resistance point, opening offer, and BATNA, all clearly explained. One thing I want to point out here that is specific to this case and will come up with other cases is that there isn't necessarily just one element for each of the target, resistance, opening offer, and BATNA. In this case, her opening offer includes what's known in the case as a rush fee. So there's actually two elements, so she explains both of them here. And as the seller in this particular case, this is something where she's providing an opening offer in relation to an issue that was mentioned above. It doesn't mean that you have to have both of those elements every time. You may find that your target is to not offer this rush fee in this particular case, so you wouldn't put it in as a target, but you might do it as part of your opening offer. Let's take a look now at the next section in the plan, looking at the guide. And this is your preliminary assessment of your opponent. This includes what you think their target point is, their resistance point is, their possible interests, and their possible opening offer or position, and then any perceived strengths or weaknesses in your opponent. Going back to the plan template now, we see that it's the same basic idea we were looking at before, maintaining that formatting. You delete those X's and then you put in the lines of your content in the same way that you were doing your key opening data. So let's go back now to the example from our previous student and have a look at what she did with this section. As you can see, it's very clearly laid out, good spacing, easy to read. We begin with a target point, and in this target point she's got two elements. She's got the price of the piston and the delivery schedule, and then she explains it very well in the next line. It's important to remember that this is not two separate target points. It's one with two different facets to it, and then we have the explanation. Then on to the resistance point, again clearly explained, a couple of lines, possible interests, a couple of explanations for those, and then their possible opening offer or opening position at $300 a piston. This is something that you have to think about and come up with a rationale for every single time. And then she looks at their perceived strengths and perceived weaknesses. Again, these are things you have to try to pull out of the case, and it may not be obvious, but these are the things that you have to look at and make sure that the formatting is really clear. What I like about this a lot is that each one has a separate bullet. The formatting is very easy to follow with the eye, and it respects the overall structure of the template. Moving to the next section, we have a look at the guide, and we see that we're looking at two shorter sections, but also very important. What do I know about the other negotiators' negotiation style and personal reputation? What are your anticipated competitive advantages, if any? For the record, virtually always there's at least one competitive advantage in the work you're going to be doing. And then the next section, this is pretty much the most important part of the plan, and that is your proposed strategies and any bargaining tactics you tend to employ. So your overall negotiation strategy, tactics, and your backup plan. You need to include your rationale for everything, plus an explanation of any additional assumptions you're making. It all has to be solid here. Moving on now, we're going to look at the template and see where the information goes. Same idea as with the rest of the sections. Clear, follow the line spacing and the formatting, and really important to proofread your work too. But leave a line space, start writing, and put in the information you feel belongs here. One important note is that this section, and it's mentioned in the guide tutorial, you may not have an answer for the other negotiator's style. Just put NA, meaning not applicable. Moving on to the next section now, which is about strategy. In the guide, it explains everything. So here, as we look at it, the first thing you start with is a very clear strategy right at the beginning. This is your primary strategy. Clearly articulate what it is and explain it in its own little paragraph. You can separate these paragraphs with bullet points or whatever formatting allows you to do it, but one paragraph per strategy. You might have two as primary, which is fine. Most of the time you'll have one primary for sure, and then you start to get into tactics. Separate little subsection. Primary tactic, you say your first one, then you provide an explanation for it, then you start to get into your second tactic if there is one, and then you get into your backup strategy and your backup tactics, all briefly explained clearly. We go now to look at the example from our previous student and see how she put these sections together. So the first one we're going to zoom in on is the opponent's negotiation style and personal reputation. She didn't know, so she put in not applicable. Often this is the case. Then we looked at our competitive advantages, and this is not a competitive advantage from a broad point of view, specifically about the negotiation. And she found that she had two, both specific to the case that she pulled out. Then we move on to the next section, and this is all about strategy and tactics. So we look at it and we see that she starts with a very clear description of her overall negotiation strategy to push for a settlement near the buyer's resistance point, and she explains it below by describing that she believes she can influence the buyer and so on. One thing I would have liked to have seen is just a little more detail in the explanation. That would have been the only improvement for this, the way she described her strategies. So that's the first part. We're going to move to the next page to see the rest of it. And we see her clean formatting here, and she's done a great job laying all of this out. And you can see with all these items how easy it is to read on screen. We start with her tactic. With the 3 points underneath, she clearly describes what she's going to do to manage the buyer's impressions and what this means to her in terms of this specific negotiation. The clarity is vital. Then we move on to the next tactic. And she has here that she is assessing the buyer's target, resistance point, and cost of terminating negotiations by. And then she gives a couple of ways she's doing it. So there's no question that she is clear about what she's trying to do and how she's going to do it. Then she has her backup. She looks at, if my initial strategy does not work, her backup strategy will be to convince the buyer that this is the best settlement possible. And underneath, as the VP of sales for Excalibur, she says that she believes a deal is possible and that they'll be able to deliver within 2 weeks. The tactic that she's chosen to go along with this backup strategy is to modify the buyer's perceptions by, and then she lists these 3 actions that she's going to take that support that tactic, highlighting the positive aspects of her proposal, making sure the outcomes of the proposal sound attractive, and willing to make concessions. She backs up her tactic with these 3 specific items that are actions and what she's thinking about in terms of executing the tactic. And then the last part, we're going to go right to the template and explain briefly what we have to do here. We have, first of all, the important constituencies or stakeholders and so on. What do I need to assemble, and what protocol is important for this negotiation? So again, I'm just reminding you that bullets and paragraphs are fine. Use them the way you need to. Make sure that the formatting is clear like everything else. And so let's take a look at what our student did in these last 3 sections. Who are the important constituencies, stakeholders, and so on? She replies as a VP of sales, and she explains she's accountable to the CEO, and she pulls out any other information that comes up in the case, and may involve a little speculation, but really sticking close to the case. Then, what do I need to assemble? I need to compile the information given by the case, so I can plan my strategy, and so on. And then she says, what protocol? The negotiation will occur in class on this particular date, and that's really the end of it. It's very important that you remember this content is for a specific case by a specific student. Each student's perspective will be different, including yours, and so be careful. Don't use the content here word for word. It will work against you. The last thing we're going to do here is have a quick look at the negotiation sheet. This can be a valuable tool in the actual negotiation because it's not something you give to me or you get marks for. It's really a way to consolidate the key information from your plan in a way that's right at your fingertips and easy to see. This can be really useful to jot down high-level notes like your resistance point, target point, opening offer, and BATNA. Then you have lots of room for other notes, and here's where you can write down your strategies that are the main ones you're going to use, along with your backup. You can also note down your tactics, both your main ones and your backups, and any other information that you may find helpful during the negotiation. Maybe you have a habit you want to watch out for, some notes on your opponent, like your opponent's resistance point, target, opening offer, and their BATNA potential from your plan. And then afterward, it's really important to put down the details of the actual agreement you reach and make sure you both have the same details so that you don't make mistakes and then wonder what happened later on and then potentially have a disagreement over what the actual deal was. Again, this is not something you hand in to me. This is something just for you as a tool to use it or not. That is your choice. May your great effort to plan effectively result in successful negotiations for you.